The rich CEO looked me dead in the eye and said, "Only speak English here. This is America." I smiled, nodded, and went back to my desk like nothing happened. But 3 weeks later, I accidentally walked into his private library looking for urgent documents, and what I found made my blood run cold. Shelves upon shelves of Spanish literature, handwritten letters in perfect Spanish, and old photographs of a clearly Latino family. The man who humiliated me for speaking my language had been hiding the exact same secret. My name doesn't matter, but my story does. I'm 38 years old, Latina, and I've been living in the United States for almost 15 years now. I came here with nothing but a suitcase, a dream stitched together with desperation, and my mother's voice in my head telling me to never forget where I came from. The journey wasn't romantic. It was brutal, lonely, and exhausting. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college, then clawed my way into a 4-year university while sending money back home every month. My mother still lives in our small town. My younger brother is in high school. My father passed away when I was 22. I am the breadwinner, the hope, the one who made it out. So when I got the call that I'd been hired as an executive assistant at Sterling Tech, one of the fastest growing tech companies in the country, I cried. Not the pretty kind of crying you see in movies, but the ugly, shoulder-shaking kind where you can't breathe because relief and disbelief hit you at the same time. This was it. This was the validation that all those years of sacrifice meant something. I was going to work directly under Marcus Sterling, the CEO, a man Forbes called the visionary who rewrote Silicon Valley. He was brilliant, ruthless, and untouchable, and I was going to be in his orbit. The first day arrived on a Monday in late September. The air had that crisp edge to it, the kind that makes you believe in new beginnings. I wore my best blazer, the navy one I'd saved up for months to buy, paired with black slacks and simple heels. I wanted to look professional, competent, invisible, in the way immigrants learn to be when they need to blend in. The Sterling Tech headquarters was in downtown San Francisco, a sleek glass tower that reflected the sky like a mirror. Inside, everything was white marble, chrome accents, and the faint hum of ambition. People moved quickly, spoke in clipped tones, and avoided eye contact unless absolutely necessary. It felt like walking into a temple where the god was productivity. I was greeted by Diane, the outgoing assistant I was replacing. She was blonde, polished, and smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. She walked me through the schedule, the filing systems, the preferences Mr. Sterling had for his coffee, his meetings, his everything. "He's exacting," she said. "But if you do your job well, you'll be fine. Just don't make mistakes." I nodded, taking mental notes, already feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on my shoulders. She left at noon. I was on my own. The morning went smoothly. I answered emails, coordinated with department heads, prepared briefing documents for an afternoon meeting. Marcus Sterling himself didn't arrive until almost 11. When he walked in, the entire floor seemed to inhale. He was tall, probably 6'2", with salt and pepper hair slicked back, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of cold steel. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He didn't acknowledge me, just walked past my desk and into his office, the door closing with a soft final click. Lunch came. I stepped outside to the small courtyard behind the building, found a bench in the sun, and unwrapped the sandwich I'd packed that morning. It was quiet, peaceful. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She always worries if I don't check in. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Mija, she said, her voice warm and familiar. ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo fue tu primer día? And just like that, I slipped into Spanish. It was automatic, comforting, like wrapping myself in a blanket. I told her about the building, the marble floors, how nervous I was, how much I missed her. I laughed when she told me about my brother forgetting his lunch again. For 5 minutes, I wasn't an executive assistant trying to prove herself. I was just me. Then I heard his voice. Excuse me. I looked up. Marcus Sterling stood 3 feet away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. My heart dropped. Yes, Mr. Sterling? I said, quickly switching to English, my accent suddenly feeling heavier on my tongue. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, slowly and deliberately, "Only speak English here. This is America." The words landed like stones. I felt my face flush, heat crawling up my neck. Around us, a few other employees had paused, pretending not to listen, but absolutely listening. "I was on a personal call," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I understand," he replied. "But while you're on company property, on company time, even during lunch, I expect English. Professionalism matters here. I'm sure you understand." He didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked back inside, leaving me sitting there with my phone still in my hand and my mother's voice, distant and confused, asking, "Mija, ¿estás bien?" I told her I had to go, hung up, sat there staring at my half-eaten sandwich, my appetite gone, replaced by a burning knot of shame and anger. I wanted to scream. I wanted to quit. But I couldn't. I needed this job. My family needed this job. So I swallowed it. All of it. The humiliation, the rage, the injustice of being told that my language, my mother's language, didn't belong here. I wrapped up my sandwich, threw it in the trash, and went back inside. That afternoon, I worked harder than I'd ever worked. I was flawless, efficient, silent, and I promised myself I would never speak Spanish at work again. If someone asked me to describe those first 3 weeks at Sterling Tech, I'd say it felt like holding my breath underwater. You know you can't stay down forever, but you keep pushing, hoping you'll surface before your lungs give out. Every morning I walked into that gleaming building with my shoulders back and my accent carefully flattened. I smiled at people who didn't smile back. I answered phones in the crispest English I could manage. I erased myself piece by piece because that's what survival looked like. Marcus Sterling was relentless. He expected perfection, and anything less was met with cold silence or clipped corrections. "This report has a typo on page 3. Redo it." "The meeting started 2 minutes late because you didn't confirm with the client. Don't let it happen again." "I don't drink my coffee this hot. Remember that." He never yelled. He didn't have to. His disappointment was a scalpel, precise and cutting. I learned quickly that the best way to exist around him was to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, to be 3 steps ahead, invisible until necessary. But the hardest part wasn't the work. It was the isolation. There were other Latino employees at Sterling Tech, mostly in maintenance, IT support, or lower-level admin roles. Sometimes I'd pass them in the hallway and we'd exchange glances, that silent recognition that said, "I see you, I know." But I never spoke to them in Spanish, not even a greeting. I was terrified someone would report me, that Marcus would find out, that I'd be labeled unprofessional or, worse, ungrateful. So I kept my head down and my mouth shut. At home, it was different. I'd call my mother every night and let the Spanish flow freely, like opening a release valve. She'd tell me about her day, the neighbors, my brother's grades, and I'd soak it all in, desperate for that connection to who I really was. But even those calls started to feel bittersweet, because the more I suppressed my identity at work, the more I felt like I was living two separate lives, and neither one felt entirely real. There were moments, though, when I'd catch Marcus Sterling staring out the window of his office, his expression distant, almost haunted. He'd stand there for minutes, completely still, like he was somewhere else entirely. Once, I walked in with a file he'd requested and he didn't even notice me. He was looking at the skyline, jaw tight, eyes dark, with something I couldn't name. "Mr. Sterling," I said softly. He snapped back, blinked, and took the file without a word, but for just a second I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, sadness, I couldn't tell, and then it was gone, replaced by that same impenetrable mask. I started to wonder about him. Who was Marcus Sterling when he wasn't the CEO? Did he have family, friends? Did he ever feel lonely in that massive corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and imported furniture? I didn't dare ask, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, because beneath all that power and coldness, there was something else, something human, something broken. The office became my entire world. I arrived early, left late, skipped lunches more often than not. My coworkers were polite but distant. I wasn't part of their happy hours or coffee runs. I told myself it didn't matter. I was here to work, not make friends. But some nights, walking to the bus stop alone while everyone else piled into Ubers together, I felt the loneliness settle in my chest like a stone. One afternoon, I overheard two employees talking near the break room. One of them, a woman named Jessica, said, "I don't know how she does it. Working for Marcus? I'd lose my mind." The other one laughed. "She's probably used to it. You know, people like her are just grateful to be here." People like her. I stood there, frozen, my hand on the door handle. They didn't see me, but I heard every word. And I understood exactly what they meant. I wasn't one of them. I never would be, not here. That night, I cried in the shower. Not because of what they said, but because part of me had started to believe it, that I should be grateful, that I should stay quiet, that speaking my language, celebrating my culture, being proud of where I came from, was somehow unprofessional. I hated myself for thinking that way, but I didn't know how to stop. By the end of week 3, I was exhausted, not physically, though the hours were brutal, but emotionally. I felt like I was disappearing, like every day I showed up to that office, a little more of who I really was got erased. And Marcus Sterling, he barely looked at me. I was efficient, reliable, invisible, exactly what he wanted. But late at night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the image of him standing at that window, looking like a man carrying the weight of a secret too heavy to name. I had no idea how right I was. Thank you for staying with me this far. I know this story is heavy, and I appreciate you listening. If you're connecting with this, leave the word strength in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to this story, and I promise, what comes next will change everything. Now let me tell you about the night I discovered the truth. It happened on a Friday evening in mid-October. The office was nearly empty by 6:30. Most people had rushed out to start their weekends, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and the quiet hum of computers left on standby. I was still at my desk finishing up a summary report Marcus needed first thing Monday morning. He'd already left for the day, which was unusual. Normally, he stayed late sometimes until 9 or 10, working through emails or reviewing contracts. But tonight, his office was dark, his door closed. At 7:15, my phone buzzed. An email from the head of legal, Karen Cho. Subject line, urgent. She needed copies of a contract from 2019, something related to a merger that was being reviewed again. She said the files should be in the executive archives on the 23rd floor, the floor reserved for C-suite offices and private meeting rooms. I'd only been up there once during my initial tour. It was quieter up there, more exclusive. Everything smelled like leather and expensive cologne. I grabbed my keycard and took the elevator up. The 23rd floor was silent. My footsteps echoed on the polished wood floors as I made my way to the archive room. It was a small windowless space lined with filing cabinets. I pulled open drawers, scanning labels, searching for anything marked 2019 mergers. 10 minutes passed, then 15, nothing. I checked my email again to make sure I had the right year, the right department. I did, but the files weren't here. I stood there, frustrated, wondering if Karen had given me the wrong location. Then I remembered something Diane, the previous assistant, had mentioned in passing during my first day. Sometimes Marcus keeps important documents in his study. It's down the hall from his office. But don't ever go in there. That's his private space. At the time, I'd nodded and filed the information away. But now, standing in an empty archive room with an urgent request and no files, I hesitated. I looked at my watch. 7:40. Marcus was gone. The floor was deserted. If the files were in his study, I could grab them, scan them, and email them to Karen before the night was over. I walked down the hallway slowly, my heart beating faster with each step. The door to Marcus's study was at the far end, past his main office. It was unmarked, blending into the dark wood paneling of the walls. I tested the handle. Unlocked. I pushed it open gently, and the hinges gave a soft creak. The room took my breath away. It wasn't an office, it was a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered 3 walls, packed tight with hundreds, maybe thousands of books. A leather armchair sat near a reading lamp in one corner. A large wooden desk occupied the center, its surface neat and organized. The air smelled like old paper and something faintly sweet, like vanilla or cedar. It was warm, intimate, nothing like the sterile, modern aesthetic of the rest of the building. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the shelves for anything that looked like files or documents. But as I moved closer, something stopped me cold. The books. They weren't in English. Row after row after row of Spanish literature. Garcia Marquez, Isabel Allende, Pablo Neruda, Octavio Paz, Jorge Luis Borges. First editions, some of them leather-bound and carefully preserved. I reached out and touched the spine of Cien Años de Soledad, my fingers trembling. My mother used to read me passages from this book when I was a child. I pulled it from the shelf and opened it. Inside the front cover, in neat handwriting, was a note in Spanish. Para Marco, de tu abuela, que nunca olvides de dónde vienes. For Marco, from your grandmother. May you never forget where you come from. I stared at the inscription, my mind racing. Marco. Not Marcos. Marco. I turned slowly, taking in the rest of the room. On the desk there was a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. I picked them up carefully, untied the ribbon, and unfolded the top letter. It was written in Spanish, the handwriting delicate and slanted. Mi querido hijo, it began. My dear son. The letter was from a woman named Rosa, dated 15 years ago. She wrote about missing him, about how proud she was, about how hard life was without him, but that she understood why he had to leave. She signed it. Con todo mi amor, Mama. My hands were shaking now. I set the letters down and looked around the room again, more carefully this time. On one of the shelves, partially hidden behind a row of books, were several framed photographs. I pulled one forward. It showed a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in front of a small worn house. The paint was peeling. The yard was dirt. The boy wore shorts and a faded t-shirt, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. Behind him, a woman stood with her hand on his shoulder. She looked tired but kind, her face lined with years of hard work. I picked up another photograph. This one showed the same boy, older now, maybe 14, standing with a group of other kids in what looked like a school courtyard. They were all holding books, smiling. In the background, you could see a painted sign. Escuela Secundaria Benito Juárez. My breath caught. I knew that name. That was a school in a small town in southern Mexico, not far from where my own family was from. I looked at more photographs. Each one told the same story. A humble life, a loving family, a boy who grew up with nothing but dreams, and in every single photo I saw him. Older, sharper, more polished in each image, but unmistakably him. Marco Sterling, or rather Marco Estrada. I set the photographs down carefully and moved back to the desk. There, tucked under a leather portfolio, was a document. I pulled it out. It was a birth certificate, yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded. Name: Marco Antonio Estrada. Place of birth: San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. Date of birth: March 14th, 1975. Parents: Rosa Maria Estrada and unknown. I stood there, holding the birth certificate in my hands, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might echo off the walls. Marcus Sterling, the man who had humiliated me for speaking Spanish, the man who demanded professionalism and assimilation, the man who acted like he'd been born into this world of power and privilege, was Marco Estrada. A boy from a small Mexican town, an immigrant just like me. I felt 100 emotions at once: anger, betrayal, confusion, but also, strangely, a deep, aching sadness, because I understood in that moment what he'd done. He'd erased himself, changed his name, buried his past, built an empire on the bones of the person he used to be. And now he enforced the same erasure on people like me, because if he couldn't be Marco Estrada, then no one else got to be themselves either. I carefully put everything back where I'd found it: the letters, the photographs, the birth certificate. I closed the book and slid it back onto the shelf. I stood in the center of that library for a long moment, surrounded by his hidden truth, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. This was about every person who'd ever been told to hide who they were to survive. Every person who'd been made to feel ashamed of their language, their culture, their story. I walked out of the study, closed the door quietly behind me, and took the elevator back down to my floor. I never did find the files Karen needed. I emailed her, apologized, said I'd look again on Monday. Then I grabbed my coat, turned off my computer, and went home. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of what I'd seen. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Hey, I know this is a lot to take in. If you're still with me, thank you. This story is about to take a turn. And I promise, the best part is coming. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky and the threat of rain. I got to the office early, before most people, before Marcus. I sat at my desk, hands folded, heart steady. I wasn't nervous, I was certain. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt like myself again. Marcus arrived at 10, as usual. He walked past me without a word, his face unreadable, his posture perfect. I waited 5 minutes. Then I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and knocked on his door. "Come in," he called. I opened the door and stepped inside. He was sitting at his desk reviewing something on his tablet, barely glancing up. "Do you need something?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I need to talk to you." Now he looked up. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to read me. "About what?" I took a breath. "About Friday night, about the library." His entire body went still. The tablet in his hands froze mid-scroll. His jaw tightened, just a fraction, but enough for me to see. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I think you do," I replied. "I was looking for files in the archives. I couldn't find them, so I went to your study, and I found something else instead." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. He set the tablet down slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving mine. "You entered my private study without permission," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes," I said. "I did. And I saw everything. The books, the letters, the photographs, the birth certificate." His face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear. He stood up, towering over me, trying to regain control. "You had no right," he said. "Maybe not," I replied. "But you had no right to humiliate me for speaking Spanish when you are Marco Estrada. When you grew up in Mexico. When your mother wrote you letters in Spanish. When your entire history, your entire identity is the same thing you told me to hide." The air between us crackled. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, I switched to Spanish. "Sí, entré, y encontré a Marco Estrada." Yes, I entered. And I found Marco Estrada. His reaction was immediate. His shoulders sagged, just slightly. His eyes widened. And, for the first time since I'd met him, Marcus Sterling looked human, vulnerable, scared. "Don't," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't what?" I asked. "Say your real name? Acknowledge who you are?" He turned away from me, walked to the window, the same window where I'd seen him staring so many times before. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, tired. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," I said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he started talking. "I came to this country when I was 16, he said. "My mother sold everything we had to pay a coyote to get me across the border. I walked through the desert for 3 days. I almost died. When I finally made it to California, I was alone, terrified, and I didn't speak a word of English." He paused, his breath fogging the glass. "I worked in kitchens, cleaning floors, washing dishes. I slept in a room with 7 other men. I sent every dollar I could back to my mother. I studied English at night using library books. I worked my way through community college, then state school. I changed my name when I applied to graduate programs because Marco Estrada wasn't getting callbacks. Marco Sterling did. I listened, my chest tight. I built this company from nothing," he continued. "I worked 80-hour weeks. I sacrificed everything. And I did it by becoming someone else, because the world didn't want Marco. It wanted Marcus, clean, American, unthreatening. He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes, though he fought to keep them from falling. I thought if I erased who I was, I could finally belong, I could finally be respected, I could finally be safe. "And your mother?" I asked quietly. "She died 5 years ago," he said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't go back for the funeral. My immigration status was still complicated. By the time I became a citizen, she was already gone. I never got to tell her." He stopped, unable to finish. I felt my own tears rising. Because I understood the crushing weight of wanting to belong so badly that you're willing to erase yourself. I understood the fear of deportation, of rejection, of being seen as less than. But I also understood something he didn't. "You think hiding made you safe," I said. "But it didn't. It just made you lonely. And now you're forcing other people to do the same thing. You're making us erase ourselves because you couldn't live with who you were." He looked at me, pain written across his face. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are," I interrupted. "You humiliated me for speaking Spanish, my mother's language, the language your mother spoke to you. You told me to be professional, to assimilate, to hide. You've built this entire empire on the lie that being American means erasing everything else, and you know what? That's not strength. That's cowardice." The words hung between us. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, looking like a man who'd been carrying a secret for so long that it had hollowed him out from the inside. "I don't know how to be both," he finally said, his voice small. "I don't know how to be Marco and Marcus." "Then maybe it's time to figure it out," I said. "Because you're not the only one paying the price for your fear. Every Latino employee in this building sees you and thinks they have to become you to succeed. They think they have to hide. They think their language, their culture, their identity is something to be ashamed of, and that's on you." He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly. When he opened them again, there was something different there. Not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want you to stop hiding," I said. "I want you to remember who you were before you became Marcus Sterling. I want you to use your power to open doors, not close them. And I want you to let me speak Spanish whenever I damn well please." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "And if I don't?" I shrugged. "Then I walk out of here, and I take your story with me, not as a threat, just as the truth, because people deserve to know that the man demanding assimilation is the same man who erased his own name to survive." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Okay." "Okay what?" I asked. "Okay," he repeated. "I'll try." It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a grand declaration, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all you get. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in the office. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Marco. He started small. He attended a meeting and introduced himself as Marco Sterling, though my mother called me Marco. People blinked, confused, but didn't comment. A week later, he sent a company-wide email announcing a new initiative. A diversity and inclusion task force focused specifically on creating pathways for Latino employees and other underrepresented communities. There was skepticism at first. People whispered that it was performative, that it wouldn't last, but Marcus kept going. He hired more Latino managers. He started a mentorship program. He allowed employees to celebrate cultural holidays, to speak their languages freely, to bring their whole selves to work, and slowly, the culture began to change. It wasn't perfect. There were still people who resisted, who complained that things were moving too fast, that this wasn't what Sterling Tech was supposed to be. But Marcus didn't back down. One afternoon, about 2 months after our conversation, he called me into his office. On his desk was a framed photograph. It was the one I'd seen in his library, the one of him as a boy with his mother. "I want to put this here," he said, "where everyone can see it, but I don't know if I'm ready." "Why not?" I asked. "Because once I do, there's no going back," he said. "Everyone will know." I looked at the photograph, at the young boy grinning in front of that humble house. "They should know," I said. "That boy is the reason you're here. He's the reason you built all of this. If you hide him, you're telling him he wasn't enough. And he was. He always was." Marcus looked at me, tears in his eyes again, and nodded. He picked up the photograph and placed it on the corner of his desk, right where clients and employees would see it when they walked in. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For reminding me who I am." I smiled. "You're welcome, Marco." He laughed, a real, genuine laugh, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked free. As for me, I started speaking Spanish again, loudly, proudly, unapologetically. I called my mother during lunch breaks, and when people walked by, I didn't stop mid-sentence. I didn't lower my voice. I just kept talking, kept being myself. Some people stared, some people whispered. But I didn't care, because I'd learned something important. Hiding who you are doesn't make you professional. It just makes you silent, and I was done being silent. A few months later, Marcus, he insisted I call him that now, asked me to help him draft a speech for a major tech conference. He wanted to talk about immigration, identity, and the cost of assimilation. He wanted to tell his story, his real story. We worked on it together, late nights in his office, surrounded by those Spanish books he no longer hid. When the day of the conference came, I sat in the audience and watched as he took the stage. He stood there in front of hundreds of people and said, "My name is Marcus Sterling, but it used to be Marco Estrada." The room went silent, and then he told them everything. The dessert, the kitchens, the name change, the shame, the loss, and finally, the decision to stop hiding. When he finished, the applause was deafening, not because he was a CEO or a success story, but because he was human, because he was real, and because his story was the story of millions of people who'd been told they had to choose between their identity and their dreams. After the speech, a young woman approached him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said in Spanish. "Thank you for saying what I've been too afraid to say." Marco smiled and responded in Spanish. "De nada. Nunca olvides de dónde vienes." "You're welcome. Never forget where you come from." I stood there watching, and I realized something. This was never just about me. It was never just about Marco. It was about every person who'd ever been made to feel like they had to shrink, hide, or erase themselves to be accepted. It was about reclaiming the parts of ourselves we'd been told didn't belong. And it was about using our voices, our stories, our power to make space for others to do the same. So what do you think? Did I do the right thing by confronting him? Should he have kept his secret? How would you have handled finding out the truth? I want to hear your thoughts, so leave them in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something, please share it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter, stories about real people navigating impossible situations. Because your story matters too, and you should never have to hide it. Thank you for listening. Until next time.